It is 1750s. Somewhere in coastal Massachusetts, a candlemaker's apprentice wakes before dawn. The room is dark, but not empty of light. A thin gray line traces the edge of the shutter, where the sky outside is only just beginning to lift from black to something softer. The air is cold enough to see your breath if you care to look, but you do not look yet. You lie still for a moment, listening. The house makes small sounds around you. A settling beam somewhere overhead, the faint tick of cooling ash in the hearth below, the wind moving low along the eaves outside. Somewhere further off, a rooster tests its voice once, then falls silent again, as if deciding it is still too early. It is too early. But there is work waiting, and work does not care what the rooster thinks. You lie a moment longer under the heavy wool blanket, feeling the last of the night's warmth held close around you, and you let your eyes adjust slowly to the dark shapes of the room. The low ceiling beam just above where you sleep, the shape of the small chest against the far wall, the pale square of the shuttered window. None of it moves. None of it needs to move yet. There is a particular stillness to a house just before dawn, a stillness that belongs only to this hour, before the first footstep, before the first breath of smoke rises from the hearth, before the day has properly begun to ask anything of anyone. Somewhere below, faint and far off, you can just make out the smallest creak of settling wood. The house breathing in its sleep the way old houses do, timber contracting slightly in the cold before the day's warmth returns to ease it again. You have slept in this same small room for years now, apprenticed to this same household, and you know its every sound the way you know your own heartbeat, so familiar that it no longer wakes you, only accompanies you, a kind of company in the dark. You push back the blanket, heavy and rough under your fingers, woven wool that has seen many winters before this one. The floorboards are cold against your feet when you finally set them down, a cold that travels up through your legs and settles you fully into the day. You dress in the dark by feel, the way you always do. The shirt first, soft with wear at the collar, then the breeches, then the wool stockings pulled up snug, then the leather shoes that have softened to the shape of your feet over the seasons. There is no need for a candle yet. Candles are not for dressing. Candles are for later, for reading, for careful work, for the hours when the eye truly needs them. A candle burned carelessly is a candle wasted, and nothing in this house is wasted, least of all light. You pause by the window a moment, fingers resting on the cold wood of the shutter, though you do not open it yet. There will be time enough for daylight. For now there is only the sound of your own breathing, slow and even in the quiet room, and the faint creak of the house itself settling into the morning, the way old timber does when the temperature begins, ever so slowly, to change. Downstairs, the hearth still holds a little warmth from the night before, a bed of gray ash with a faint orange glow buried somewhere inside it, like an ember sleeping under a blanket of its own. You kneel before it and blow gently, once, twice, coaxing the glow back into flame with a breath and a few strands of dry kindling. The fire catches slowly, then all at once, small tongues of orange licking up around the kindling, and the room begins to fill with the good, familiar smell of wood smoke. That smell will follow you through the whole day, the way it follows every day in this house, in this season, in this life. Wood smoke in the hair, wood smoke in the wool of your coat, wood smoke settled into the very grain of the table where you will eat your supper tonight. You add a few larger pieces of split wood once the kindling has properly caught, laying them carefully so the fire builds rather than smothers. And you watch for a moment as the flames climb higher, casting a soft moving light across the low kitchen ceiling, across the hanging pots, across the worn wooden table where so much of the day's work will happen. The room warms slowly around you, degree by degree, the cold retreating first from the space nearest the hearth, and only later, grudgingly, from the corners furthest away. Today is the day for candles. Not the small, ordinary work of trimming a wick or setting a taper in its holder, but the long, patient work of making enough candles to see the household through the coming winter, when the days will grow short and dark, and the nights will stretch on, and there will be no light at all in this house, except what you make with your own 2 hands today. You know this day is coming every year, the way the frost comes, the way the geese begin their long calls overhead when the season turns. There is a comfort in that knowing. You have done this before. Your hands remember what? The first task of the morning is the tallow. It has been rendered already days before from the fat saved back at the last butchering. Nothing wasted there either, the way nothing in this house is ever wasted. The fat had been cut away in careful strips, boiled slow in a great iron kettle until it went from solid white to clear liquid gold. The impurities skimmed off the top with a long wooden spoon again and again, until what remained was clean and pale and ready. That tallow has been sitting since, cooling into a firm block in a stone crock in the coldest corner of the cellar, waiting for a day like today. You remember the butchering itself, back in the cooler weeks before this one. The whole household given over to it for the better part of 2 days, every part of the animal put to some use, the meat salted and packed away, the hide set aside for the tanner, the bones saved for broth, and the fat, always the fat, trimmed carefully and set apart in its own tub to be rendered later, once the more urgent work of preserving the meat itself was done. Tallow is what is left when nothing has been wasted, and this house prides itself, quietly, on wasting nothing. You recall, too, the rendering days that followed soon after, the kitchen filled for hours with the low simmer of the great kettle, the fat slowly giving up its clear golden liquid while the coarser bits sank and were skimmed away. It had taken watching that work, careful attention paid to the heat of the fire beneath, never too high, never left untended for long, because a rendering pot, forgotten even briefly, could scorch its whole batch and waste days of careful butchering in a single careless hour. You had stood at that kettle yourself, stirring slow and patient, learning the particular smell that meant the tallow was nearly clean, and the different, sharper smell that meant it had begun to catch and needed the fire pulled back at once. That rendered tallow, strained finally through a length of clean linen cloth to catch any last impurity, had been poured into crocks and set down in the cellar to cool and firm, each crock a small store of the winter's coming light, waiting patiently through the weeks since for a day exactly like today. You carry the crock up from the cellar steps, careful of your footing in the dim light, one hand on the cold stone wall to steady yourself. The steps creak beneath you in the same 3 places they always creak, a small rhythm you know by heart. the way you know the creak of the floorboard by your bed and the particular groan of the front door in damp weather. Footsteps have their own music in a house like this, if you listen for it. You have learned to listen for it. The crock is heavier than it looks. The tallow inside solid and pale. The color of old ivory, cool to the touch even through the stone. You set it down carefully on the kitchen table and pry the lid free, and the smell that rises is faint but familiar. Something between wax and meat and the cold of the cellar itself. A smell that means only one thing in this house. Candle day has come. In the kitchen, the big kettle already hangs from its hook over the growing fire, filled with water set to warm. You add the tallow to a smaller pot set within it. A gentle heat. Never a hard boil, because tallow scorched is tallow ruined, and ruined tallow means fewer candles for the cold months ahead. You stir it slowly with a long wooden paddle, watching the solid block soften at the edges, then slump, then finally give way entirely into a shimmering pool, the color of pale honey. The smell rises with the steam, warm and faintly meaty, mixing with the wood smoke until the whole kitchen smells of work and winter and readiness. You watch the surface of the melting tallow carefully as it goes, skimming away any small bits that rise to the top, any specks of char or bone that might have slipped through the earlier rendering. It is careful work, unhurried work, the kind that asks patience of your hands and your eyes both. The paddle moves slow circles through the pot, around and around, and the tallow thins and clears with each turn, until at last it is smooth and golden and still, ready to receive the wicks. While the tallow melts, you turn to the wicks. They were spun days ago, too, twisted lengths of cotton, cut and doubled and looped over thin dipping rods, a dozen or more to a rod, spaced apart so they do not touch when they dip. Your fingers know this task without much thought now. Loop, twist, tie, set aside. Loop, twist, tie, set aside. A small rhythm of its own, steady as footsteps, steady as the tick of the cooling hearth at night. You check each wick before it goes to the rod, feeling for any place too thick or too thin, because an uneven wick makes an uneven candle, and an uneven candle burns poorly, sputtering and guttering when it should burn clean and steady through a long winter evening. There is a particular pleasure in handling the wicks, in the softness of the cotton against your fingers, in the small, exact motions of looping each one just so. You count them as you go, though you do not need to. A habit more than a necessity. 12 to a rod, 6 rods laid ready. 72 candles waiting to be born from thread and fat and patience. It seems, at the start of the day, like a great many candles. By the end of the day, you know, it will seem like just enough, and perhaps not quite enough at all, given how quickly a long winter can burn through even a generous store. You set the finished rods carefully across the backs of 2 chairs, pulled close together near the hearth, close enough to catch a little warmth, but not so close that the wicks themselves might dry too much or scorch before their first dipping. The chairs have held this same burden every candle day for as long as you can remember, their backs worn smooth in just the places where the rods rest. A small mark left by years of this same patient work. By the time the tallow has fully melted and gone still and clear, the wicks are ready. Rod after rod of them laid across 2 chair backs pulled close together, waiting their turn. Outside, the gray light at the window has grown only slightly less gray. the sun still low and hidden somewhere behind the thick coastal cloud that so often settles over these mornings this time of year. You take a moment before the first dip to arrange the workspace properly, the way you have been taught. The pot set at a comfortable height near the fire, close enough for warmth, but far enough that no stray spark might catch a hanging wick before its time. The chairs positioned just so, the floor beneath them swept clean of any stray straw or ash that might cling to a cooling candle. It is not glamorous work, the arranging, but it matters. A candle maker's apprentice learns early that most of the craft lies not in any single clever motion, but in this kind of quiet, careful ordering of things, so that when the real work begins, nothing need be searched for, nothing need be second-guessed. You test the tallow once more with the back of the wooden paddle, feeling for its readiness, not too hot, not too cool, the surface smooth and unbroken, and faintly steaming in the cool kitchen air. Satisfied, you draw the first chair a little closer, take up the nearest rod, and let your fingers rest a moment on its dozen waiting wicks, pale and dry, soon to begin their slow transformation. The dipping itself is slow work, and it wants to be slow. You take up the first rod, its dozen wicks hanging straight and pale, and lower them together into the pot of melted tallow. Just a moment, no longer. Dip and lift, dip and lift. The wicks come up glistening and dark, coated now in a thin, wet layer of tallow that will need to cool and harden before the next layer can be added. You hang that rod across the chair backs to cool, and take up the next, and dip that one in turn. The tallow clings to the cotton in a thin, even skin, and for a moment, in the low kitchen light, the wet coating gleams almost like glass before it begins, almost at once, to dull and stiffen as the air meets it. You watch this happen each time, though you have seen it 100 times before. The gleam, the dulling, the slow settling into solid form, a small transformation repeated again and again throughout the morning. There is no rushing this. Each layer must cool and set before the next goes on, or the tallow will simply slide away and the candle will never gain its shape. So you move in a slow circle through the morning. Dip a rod, hang it, take up the next. Dip, hang, take up the next. And by the time you return to the first rod again, its coating has cooled just enough to take another dip. Around and around, rod to rod, the candles growing by the thinnest of margins each time. So thin, you can hardly see the growth from one dip to the next. And yet by mid-morning, when you compare the fattest candles to the thin, bare wicks they began as, the change is plain and satisfying. Your arms grow familiar with the weight of each rod, light at first, heavier by slow degrees as the tallow builds. Your shoulders find their own steady rhythm, dip and lift, dip and lift. The same small motion repeated so many times that it stops feeling like 6 separate rods and starts feeling like one long, unbroken motion, one continuous turning, like a wheel slowly rolling forward through the morning. The kitchen grows warm from the hearth and the pot of tallow both, and outside the window, the gray light has become full daylight, pale and cold. The kind of coastal Massachusetts morning where the sky seems close and low and the wind carries a hint of salt, even this far from the water. You do not stop for the light outside. You keep dipping, dip and lift and hang. Dip and lift and hang. The rhythm settles into your shoulders and your wrists until you hardly need to think about it at all, and your mind can wander a little, the way it does on tasks like this. tasks that are more about patience than thought. You think as you dip of the winter evenings these candles will serve. The low table lit by their small flames while the wind pushes against the shutters outside. The quiet hours of mending or reading, or simply sitting together in the gathered light while the dark presses close against the windows. Each candle you make today is a small piece of one of those future evenings, stored up now in wax and wick, waiting patiently for its turn to be spent. The hearth crackles steadily behind you the whole while, feeding itself down to embers and being fed again, a low, constant companion to the dipping. Wood smoke drifts through the room in slow, familiar threads, settling into the wool of your clothes the way it always does, the way it will settle again tomorrow, and the day after, all through the long season ahead. By mid-morning, the rods have taken on a satisfying heft. Each dozen wicks grown from thin, bare threads into something with real shape and weight. The tallow building layer upon layer in a way too slow to watch but unmistakable to feel. You test one between thumb and finger as it hangs, gauging its thickness against memory, against the many candle days that came before this one, and judge it perhaps a third of the way toward its finished size. There is no impatience in this judging, only a kind of quiet accounting. The same accounting a farmer might make walking a field of young grain, watching for growth that comes only with time and cannot be hurried by wanting it faster. You shift your weight from foot to foot as you work, easing the small stiffness that comes from standing so long in one place, and you roll your shoulders once between dips, a small private motion that has become as much a part of candle day as the dipping itself. The pot steams gently before you, its surface stirred now and then to keep it smooth and unbroken, and the rods continue their slow circuit from your hands to the drying chairs and back again. Dip and hang, dip and hang, on and on through the quiet morning. You think sometimes, in these long stretches of repeated motion, of the apprentice who held this same rod before you, years back, and the one before that, each having stood in roughly this same spot on some earlier candle day, working through this same patient rhythm. The craft does not change much from year to year, from hand to hand. The tallow still wants the same gentle heat. The wicks still want the same careful looping. The dipping still wants the same unhurried patience, layer after layer, until thread becomes candle. There is something steadying in belonging to that long, unbroken line of hands, all of them doing, in their turn, exactly what your own hands are doing now. Midday brings a small pause, and with it, a visitor. You hear footsteps on the frozen path outside before you hear the knock. A neighbor's steady tread, unhurried, the kind of walking that belongs to someone with no urgent business, only the ordinary business of a quiet call between households. It is the woman from 2 houses down, come to trade a basket of dried apples for a portion of tallow candles once they are finished, an arrangement made some days before, and now simply being confirmed with a nod and a few quiet words at the door. You set down the rod in your hands and go to let her in, wiping your palms first against your apron. Though there is little to wipe away yet, the tallow having not fully soaked into the fabric this early in the day. She steps across the threshold with a small nod, bringing with her a gust of cold air and the smell of the outdoors, frost and wood smoke from her own hearth, still clinging faintly to her shawl. She steps inside only long enough to warm her hands briefly at the hearth, glancing at the rows of pale, thickening candles hanging across the chairs. She says the winter promises to be a long one this year, judging by how early the frost came to the low fields. And you agree, because it is the kind of thing everyone says this time of year, and it is usually true. Her eyes move slowly over the rods of candles, taking their measure, and she nods once, satisfied, as though confirming to herself that the arrangement made between your households will indeed be honored in good time. She asks after the rest of the household, and you tell her briefly that all are well, all busy with their own portion of the season's preparing. The wood being split and stacked, the last of the garden brought in and stored, the salted meat checked in its barrels down in the cellar. She nods along to each small report, unsurprised, because her own house is engaged in the very same tasks, the very same rhythm of preparing that moves through every household along this stretch of coast at this time of year. She mentions in turn her own household's efforts. The last of the apples pressed for cider only 2 days past. The barrels already set down in her own cellar to begin their slow work, and a length of wool cloth nearly finished on her loom, meant for a winter coat for her youngest boy who has grown, she says with a small tired laugh, out of nearly everything he owns since summer. You listen and nod in turn, the exchange unhurried, the kind of talk that asks for no particular response beyond simple attention. The comfortable back and forth of two households, each going about the same slow work of readying for winter, each aware of the other's efforts without needing to say so directly. She glances once more toward the window, noting the pale, low sky, and remarks that she ought not linger, with her own hearth waiting and a good deal left to see to before dusk. You agree, and there is no offense taken on either side in the shortness of the visit. Only the plain understanding that a season like this one leaves little room for lengthy calls, however welcome the company might be. She does not stay long. There is no need for long visits when the work of the day is waiting for everyone, but there is something comforting in the brief exchange all the same. The small proof that the household is not entirely alone in its winter preparations. That up and down this stretch of coastal road, other kitchens hold other pots of tallow, other hands dipping other wicks, all of you working toward the same quiet goal of light enough to last until spring. Before she goes, she pauses once more by the door, glancing back at the hanging rods with something like quiet approval, and says only that she will send her boy round in a few days' time to collect the candles once they've properly hardened and cured. You tell her that will do well enough, and she nods again, satisfied, and steps back out into the cold. When she goes, the door closes behind her with its familiar groan, and the kitchen settles back into its steady rhythm of dip and hang, dip and hang, the hearth crackling low and constant in the background, the smell of wood smoke and warm tallow filling every corner of the room. The brief interruption passes over the day like a small stone dropped into still water, a ripple, and then stillness again, the work resuming exactly where it left off. The midday meal is simple, taken standing at the table for only a few minutes, because the tallow in the pot cannot be left too long without stirring, or it may begin to scorch at the edges. There is bread, dense and a little stale, softened with a scrape of butter, and a bit of dried fish left from the autumn's catch, and a mug of something warm to drink. Cider gone slightly hard from sitting in the cellar cask. You eat quickly, but without hurry, if such a thing makes sense. The meal is small and plain, but it is enough. And there is a kind of peace in eating something so familiar that it asks nothing of you. No decisions, no surprises, only the simple comfort of bread and fish and warm cider on a cold day. The bread is chewy where it has gone a little dry, softened only where the butter has melted into it, and the fish is salty and firm. A taste that carries the memory of the sea even now, weeks after it was caught and dried. You eat standing near the hearth, letting its warmth reach your back, while the cold from the rest of the kitchen presses in from every other direction. The cider is warm enough to feel pleasant against your hands through the mug's clay walls, and you drink it slowly, savoring the faint sharpness that comes from its months of quiet fermenting in the cellar cask. Someone else in the household passes through the kitchen briefly during the meal, taking up a heel of the same bread for themselves before continuing on to whatever task waits for them this hour, exchanging only a nod and a few quiet words about the state of the woodpile before moving on. Outside, you can hear the muffled sounds of the wider household and the lane beyond it. A cart passing somewhere, wheels creaking over the frozen ruts, a dog barking once and then falling quiet, someone's voice raised briefly in greeting to someone else, too far off to make out the words. The sounds of an ordinary day going on all around you, none of it urgent, none of it demanding your attention, just the soft backdrop to your own small corner of work. You take a moment, once the last of the bread is finished, simply to stand still, mug in hand, watching the fire settle and shift in the hearth. Small collapses of ember and ash, sending up brief showers of orange sparks before subsiding again into steady glow. It is a small rest, but a real one, the kind of pause the body takes gladly after a long morning of slow, careful motion. When the meal is finished, you return to the pot, give it a slow stir, and check that the tallow has not thickened too much in the cooling kitchen air. It has not. It is still warm and pale and smooth, ready to receive the afternoon's dipping, and you feel a small satisfaction in that. The pot having been tended well enough through the interruption of the meal that no time or tallow has been lost to carelessness. There is still an afternoon's worth of dipping ahead. The afternoon begins where the morning left off, the same slow rhythm returning almost at once, dip and hang, dip and hang, the rods growing steadily thicker beneath your patient hands. The light through the window has shifted by now, the pale gray of morning giving way to a slightly warmer, more golden cast, though the coastal cloud still hangs low enough that no true sunlight ever quite breaks through. It is simply a softening of the gray, a small kindness offered by the afternoon sky. The afternoon task turns to the candles nearly finished, the ones grown thick enough now that only a few more careful dips will bring them to their full, proper size. These are handled with even greater care than the ones still thin and new, because a fat candle knocked against the pot's rim or dipped carelessly at an angle can crack its outer layer and ruin hours of patient work in a single moment. You slow your movements even further for these, lowering each rod straight down, holding it steady, lifting it straight up again. No wobble, no haste. Your hands have grown tired by now in the small way that comes from any long repeated motion. A dull ache settling into your shoulders and forearms that is not unpleasant, only present. a quiet reminder of the many hours already spent at this work. You do not mind it. It is the same tiredness that comes at the end of any honest day's labor, the kind that will ease easily enough once the evening rest begins. As the afternoon light through the window begins to shift, growing longer and more golden even through the gray coastal cloud, you begin setting the finished candles aside properly, laid in rows on a clean board, dusted lightly with flour so they will not stick. Each one pale and thick and satisfying to look upon, a small hoard of stored light waiting to be spent slowly across the coming dark months. You count them without quite meaning to, the way you always do, a habit of the season. Enough for the kitchen, enough for the upstairs room, enough, if the winter is careful and the days are managed well, to last until the first thaw brings butchering season around again, and with it, more tallow, more wicks, more long afternoons just like this one. The rest of the household moves through its own quiet tasks around you as the light continues to fade. Someone mending by the window while daylight still allows it. Someone else bringing in the last of the split wood before dark, stacking it neat against the kitchen wall with a series of soft, solid thuds. A younger sibling passes through once, pausing to admire the rows of pale candles laid out on their flowered board, running a careful finger just above one without quite touching it, the way children do when they have been taught to admire something without disturbing it. The hearth is fed again, catching a little brighter as new wood settles into the coals, and its crackle rises gently behind all the other small sounds of the house, steady, warm, familiar. For a little while, the whole household gathers loosely in the kitchen without quite meaning to, each person carrying on with a separate task, but drawn together by the warmth of the hearth and the low light of the fading afternoon. Someone hums, low and tuneless, at the mending in the window seat. Someone else recounts, without much urgency, a small piece of news carried back from the mill earlier in the day about a fallen tree blocking part of the north road, already being cleared by neighbors before nightfall. It is the kind of talk that asks nothing of anyone, small news exchanged simply for the comfort of exchanging it, filling the kitchen with quiet voices while the last of the daylight fades outside the window. You keep dipping, even as the household moves and settles around you, the last handful of rods still wanting their final layers before the day's candle making can be called complete. The rhythm has become so familiar by now that your mind drifts easily as your hands continue their work, thinking of small, unhurried things. The shape of tomorrow's tasks, the particular way the frost had silvered the window this morning, the quiet comfort of knowing that this store of candles, however many hours it has taken to build, will mean warm, lit evenings all through the coming dark season. Before the last rods are finally set aside to cool for good, there is one more small task to attend to, one that belongs properly to this hour of the day. A basket of candles from an earlier batch, made some weeks past and long since fully hardened, waits by the hearth to be trimmed and readied for use. You take them up one at a time, drawing a small knife gently along the base of each to true its edge, and snipping the wick at the top to a modest, even length. Neither so short it will gutter, nor so long it will smoke and waste itself too quickly. It is careful, unhurried work, the kind that rewards a steady hand, and you move through the basket slowly, one candle at a time, until each rests properly trimmed and ready in its own small stack. You carry the trimmed candles to the cupboard where the household's store is kept, a plain wooden cupboard near the stairs. Its shelves lined with worn cloth to keep the candles from marking one another. You set them in careful rows beside those already waiting there, the whole cupboard now holding a season's worth of stored light. One shelf for the kitchen's use, one for the upstairs rooms, a small reserve set apart entirely for the deepest, darkest weeks of midwinter, when even a single wasted candle might be sorely missed. You linger a moment at the open cupboard, counting the shelves with your eyes the way you often do, tallying what is already stored against what still hangs cooling by the chairs, against what small store yet remains in the reduced pot of tallow by the hearth. It is a careful kind of arithmetic, one every household along this coast keeps through the autumn months, weighing candles against weeks, light against dark, the plain and practical sum that decides how comfortably a winter will pass. By your reckoning, this year's store looks to be a fair one, generous enough, if no one grows careless with it, to see the household through to the first long light of spring. Closing the cupboard door, you feel a small, quiet satisfaction, the same satisfaction that comes each year at this same task, the sense of a household properly provisioned against the dark. By the time the last rod of wicks has taken its final dip and been hung to cool for good, the light outside the window has gone the deep blue-gray of early winter dusk. The pot of tallow, much reduced now, is set aside to cool fully, to be saved and reused another day for some smaller task, because even the last of it holds value, and nothing here is wasted. You wipe down the table and the paddle and the rim of the pot with care, the way you always do at the end of a candle day, leaving the kitchen as clean and orderly as it was found this morning, save for the rows of pale finished candles resting now on their flowered board, more than 70 of them, thick and even and ready for the long winter ahead. You take a last look over the day's work before banking the fire down for the evening. The rods, empty now, set back in their corner to await another candle day weeks from now. The pot scraped clean and turned upside down on the shelf to dry. The board of finished candles, pale and solid in the low light, each one a small patient triumph of thread and fat and unhurried hands. It has been a long day, hour after hour of the same slow motion, and yet, looking now at what that patience has built, the length of it seems entirely worthwhile. Each hour spent exactly as it needed to be spent. You move slower now, the way the whole house seems to move slower as the day winds down. Footsteps softer on the floorboards, voices lower, the fire banked down to a gentle, even glow rather than a bright blaze. The finished candles rest in their rows on the flowered board, pale and solid, done for today, ready to be trimmed and stored properly once they have fully hardened through the night. The hearth crackles low and steady, the way it always does at this hour, the sound settling into the quiet room like something familiar returning home. The smell of wood smoke lingers in the wool of your sleeves, in the air itself, soft and constant. Somewhere above, footsteps cross the floor once, unhurried, and then go still. You stand for a moment near the hearth, letting the last of the day's warmth and effort settle out of your shoulders, watching the low fire shift and glow in its bed of ash. The rows of candles nearby seem, in this soft light, almost to glow themselves, though it is only the fire's reflection catching their pale surfaces. a promise of light yet to come, resting quiet and ready in the dimming kitchen. Tomorrow will bring its own small tasks, different from today's, but cut from the same steady cloth. Mending, perhaps, or wood to be split, or bread to be set to rise before the fire. Whatever it brings, it will be met the same way this day was met. One quiet task following another, patient hands doing patient work, the whole household moving through the season together, one ordinary day at a time. For now, though, there is only the evening, and the low fire, and the rest that has been fairly earned. There is little left to do now but rest. One candle is lit for the evening, just one, its flame small and steady in the gathering dark, casting a soft gold circle over the table, and little else. It is enough. It does not need to be more than enough. You sit with it a while, the day's work finished, your hands still faintly warm and faintly scented with tallow and wood smoke both. A smell you have long since stopped noticing as separate from your own skin. The house has gone quiet around you. The kind of quiet that settles in only once every task has been properly finished, once every rod has been hung and every ember banked, once the whole household has, each in turn, allowed itself to slow. Somewhere behind you, in the deeper dark of the house, a door is drawn softly closed for the night, and a set of footsteps moves once across the upstairs floor and then settles and does not move again. The fire in the hearth has burned down to little more than a bed of quiet coals, glowing faint orange beneath their gray blanket of ash, giving off just enough warmth to keep the chill from the room without demanding to be tended further tonight. The hearth glows low. The wood smoke drifts soft and familiar. The house settles into its quiet rhythm of small sounds and stillness. Outside, the coastal night deepens, cold and clear. The sea somewhere beyond the dark fields, unseen and unheard, simply there, the way it always is. Somewhere out past the frozen lane, an owl calls once, low and far off, and then the night is silent again, holding its stillness the way it always does at this hour. The candle flame flickers once, and steadies, and burns on, small and patient, keeping its own quiet watch over the sleeping house. You watch it a little longer, the small flame swaying gently with some current of air, too faint to feel, casting its soft light over the worn table, over the rows of pale candles resting nearby, over your own tired hands, folded now in your lap. There is nothing left to do. The day is finished. The winter, a little further prepared for, waits quietly ahead. And for now, only this small light and this small stillness remain. Your eyelids grow heavy in the candle's soft glow, the warmth of the low fire settling deep into your tired shoulders, the smell of tallow and wood smoke wrapping around you, like the wool blanket waiting upstairs. There will be more candle days before the winter is through, more mornings of rendering and dipping, more quiet visits from neighbors trading what they have for what they need. But that is for another day. Tonight there is only this small flame, this low fire, this soft and settled house. The hearth glows low. The wood smoke drifts soft. The house is still.